Welcome to On Point. Today we have the former Director of Human Relations in the Newport Mesa Unified School District with us. John Caldecott has 35 years of experience in K-12 school districts human resources. He spent the last 10 years of his career at Newport Mesa Unified School District. 5 years as Director of Classified Personnel and 5 years as the Executive Director of Human Resources. In September of this year, John Caldecott brought a complaint against the Superintendent, Fred Navarro. The Board of Education denied that complaint. Fast forward to January 27th of this year, John asked the Orange County Superior Court to release documents that he argues are public. A few days later, he was fired. Those records have never been released. Last week, John made quite a stir when he appeared before the board and accused them of allowing the superintendent to be, quote, prosecutor, judge, and jury, unquote, and admonished them, saying, quote, at the very least, you owe the employees an investigation of the facts, unquote. Full disclosure, John and I have known each other a long time. We served on the benefits committee together, and even though we often didn't agree, we usually worked it out and had a little fun in the process. Hi, John. Everyone's dying to know what the heck is going on.
Okay, well, I'll try to offer some clarification.
Okay, can I ask you the first question? When did you file the complaint against the superintendent?
The formal complaint was about October 2014, and I just want to make it clear from the outset because I know you're interested in this and I've had other questions about it. I did claim whistleblower protection in the initial complaint. There were a series of core complaints that I made. I claimed whistleblower protection under all of those areas. And I am claiming whistleblower protection at this time because it also has protection for former employees. So I just want to make that clear at the outset.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that, actually. I thought it was the other way around. Is there anything more that you can tell us about the topics included in the CPRA request number 1? And could you tell us what CPRA is?
That stands for California Public Records Act.
Okay.
And I'm talking about request number 1. I have 2, and I can clarify 2 in following questions. I do have some notes, and I'm going to refer to those notes because I'm going to tell the audience some more specifics about the core areas contained in the complaint. And it's not limited to these, but I think these are the core areas. So I'll go through those in sequence. They really, in my opinion, have the potential of being improper governmental activities, and they were provided with extensive documentation that were attached to each of the areas. The CPRA number 1, to clarify that, is 94 pages long, which includes memos, emails, reports from the board, attachments, etc. So it is extensive, and it is a bit HR-ish. I will admit some of them are pretty technical areas. If the public receives this information, it will take some time to go through those 94 pages and understand each of the areas and concerns. But area number 1, hostile and abusive working environment, was reported for 3 employees, including myself. And that, to clarify, includes creating conflict, pressure, fear, intimidation, retaliation, and ignoring the Whistleblower Protection Act. Number 2, discrepancies with recurring payments to an administrator for extra days beyond the work year, and discrepancies in reporting that extra duty pay to STRS. That is area number 2. Number 3, superintendent proposed performance pay increases for 2 specific administrators. The questions were about the justification for that, the transparency of it, the equity, and the timing of the superintendent's proposal to increase 2 administrators on the performance pay, which can be 0 to 8% for management employees. Number 4, unanswered questions regarding the superintendent's proposed changes to the certificated management salary schedule Now that would be totally confusing to people because it was an internal matter. I believe it will become public. But my questions again were the justification, the timing, and the transparency of the superintendent's recommended changes.
Okay.
Number 5, unanswered questions about STRS reporting practices for management. My call for a forensic audit of STRS reporting practices for management to address discrepancies was ignored on several occasions.
You requested an audit.
That's correct.
And did you requested through the Board of Education?
Through the superintendent and copies to the board.
Okay. But you didn't contact STRS on your own?
I didn't say I didn't contact them.
Okay.
And I think that is a question coming up, so I'll say
Sorry.
That's okay.
All right.
So I did call for a forensic audit of STRS reporting for all certificated management. Number 6, non-standard initial salary placement and interference by the superintendent during the salary offer process for a management employee who was being hired. My questions were about cost, consistency with standard practice applied to other management hires. And so those are all some of the key elements of the CPRA number 1.
Okay. Wow. So
that's obviously more than I've said
yes.
so far, and I believe it's time to at least give the topics an appropriate. I'm no longer an employee,
right,
and I think it's time to do that.
Okay, this was part of, was this, I'm confused, was this part of the original complaint that was sent initially in September?
It was all part of the initial complaint and different components that occurred up until the board's report. I will also say on all of those areas, as I think is I am known for, I sought positive solutions and resolutions internally. I was ignored on my questions.
Did anyone speak to you other than the superintendent, or did that come up in any conversation you had with board members, or?
The board, I might say this a couple of times, the board has all of the documentation that was provided to the superintendent.
Okay. Did the board understand the supporting documentation of the complaints, do you think, before issuing their December 10th report?
Well, it's hard to speculate what people understand. I've always had a little problem with that since I don't have access to what's inside their head. But I can tell you they did receive all of the documentation in writing. I think it's extensive, 94 pages of information. They certainly had the opportunity to read it. They had it in their possession for several months, and over a period of several months, even though some issues were added along the way. But, boards are lay people. They're not necessarily HR experts. So that's why we investigate. And what would be typical for me, in my experience, would be you'd get an independent investigator, which was actually promised to me initially in the first 10 days after I filed the complaint. And you have that investigator look at the facts, interview witnesses, look at documentation, seek other documentation, and then prepare a comprehensive report of what the issues are, findings of fact, recommendations, and that's typically what goes in executive summary to the board so that they can review from an objective person's standpoint what happened.
You say you were promised this. Who promised you that?
The district's legal counsel said that if this was not resolved informally, then an independent investigator would be assigned, and that he was authorized to initiate that if there was no informal settlement. I heard nothing after the informal attempt, which failed. I had to actually ask the district what was the status of the complaint at one point. There was no investigation. I was never talked to. There are other individuals that I will not name that are in the documents, they were never talked to. It is quite clear to me that the initial part of any complaint procedure is investigation. Now, I am the compliance officer for the district, so I handle complaints from members of the public, that includes parents, also from teachers regarding other teachers, employee, public versus employee. All of those complaints come through my office, and I had the primary responsibility for investigating those, preparing reports to the board, and allowing those individuals to speak to the board and state their case.
Which kind of brings me to the next question.
Yes.
Or did you have something else to say about regarding
No, I did
that?
not.
Okay.
Okay.
Did you ever receive an opportunity to address the board about the issues in the complaint against the superintendent or about your termination without cause? Did you ever have a chance to talk to the board?
I never got
or
the
any member of the board?
I never got the opportunity to speak directly to any member. As I said, I sent information to them in their role as the employer and supervisor of the superintendent. That is the appropriate contact in that case. I think it's unprecedented in my 10 years experience that the board did not give someone the opportunity that filed a complaint to speak directly to them, whether that's in a complaint process, which I did not receive, or in a termination. They have also allowed employees who are subject to termination to come before the board and make a presentation. I was not permitted either opportunity.
You asked, and you were not permitted.
I was never offered. I didn't even know until I received the report that they would go ahead without giving me that opportunity. For example, in the board's report, and I'm talking about the December 10th report issued by the board.
Yeah, right.
I simply received that. Normally, there is a provision under the board policy to allow an opportunity in which case you contact a person to ask them. It's not up to me to initiate that request. In my experience in that role in HR, that has been offered.
Did you, so you didn't have any warning that you were going to be terminated, or did you?
I did not have any warning. And there was some communication that is part of CPRA number 2, that is between the superintendent and me to the Board of Education. But I received a text from the superintendent on the 22nd at about 6 o'clock in the evening, and it said, "You're on paid administrative leave. You need to check your email." And when I checked my email, there was a letter from him to me indicating that I was placed immediately on paid administrative leave that evening, that I should not report to work, and that he was recommending my termination to the board on January 27th. 5 days.
In 5 days.
In 5 days. And then my contract will be terminated without cause. And that is a provision under that contract. That is a 3-year contract, but it can be terminated unilaterally by the district or the board as long as there is a payout for 18 months.
So, were you, I've got to ask this because you were you're the chief negotiator for the district, right, with the unions.
Yes.
And so you have a close association with board members and have, I imagine, for quite some time. You meet with them, you talk with them, you answer their questions. And yet, they voted unanimously to fire you. Was that a shock to you, or what,
Well, yes, that was a shock to a degree, but all along the way, from the very beginning, it was clear to me that the superintendent was the only person that they were talking to. So he was, in essence, advising the board and directing legal staff, legal counsel, on how to respond. And it was clear to me that they were hearing one side of the story. They gave their unconditional support to the superintendent, did not feel the need to investigate, did not feel the need to talk to me, and That is unprecedented as well. You do not have the subject of the complaint doing the investigation, if there was one, which there wasn't, or advising someone else with regard to how to handle the complaint. That is a hands-off. That is an ethical issue. That is a conflict of interest issue where the individual involved, let's say it's the principal, and a teacher has a complaint against the principal. I wouldn't have the principal actively involved in communicating with the employee about what the status of their complaint is, or what's going to be done, or what the investigation is like, or what action will be taken. That is, as I said before the board, that's HR 101. Now, why they didn't get that advice and why they supported the superintendent is disturbing to me. Knowing that I was a 10-year employee, I'm not bragging, but I think I have a very, very good employment record. And I have also, in that association with the board, I think demonstrated that I can be effective in reaching district goals and creating relationships and working with people and unions and individual employees to get positive results. Yes, I was surprised by the 7-0 vote, but I now question their understanding of the 94 pages. I really do. I'm not sure whether they independently reviewed that information as individual board members and then came together collectively as a group to consider and debate those issues. I don't think that happened. I don't know for sure.
Is that typical for the board or not? I mean, just generally or not? And also, there are 2 new members of the board. So I guess you could question how much they would actually know about the process.
Well, of course, I have a lot of inside information about what deliberation the board goes through. And I will tell you, as an HR person, I felt I was being held to the highest standard of ethics in my treatment of employees. And I remember many times when I would simply think before going to the board, have I done everything possible to support this employee before going forward with some type of discipline? I thought that's what they expected out of me. And I certainly left no stones unturned. And I remember them being appreciative of how hard the district tried to support an employee before resorting to some formal action, which we all try to avoid. I did not receive the same courtesy. And that shocks me with this board, even with 2 new members.
Have they reached out to you at all since?
No.
Okay. Why can't you just release the CPR requests 1 and 2 yourself without going through the process, through the CPRA process?
Well, maybe I'm being highly sensitive as, a top-level administrator. I've had inside access to virtually all information about everyone in the district for 10 years. I was sensitive to that. Of course, I initiated the first CPRA when I was an employee. And it's quite clear that I could not release confidential information as an employee. Now, I have a writ of mandate. It's been turned over to a judge to decide what public records should be released. And I'm not prepared to interfere with that.
Do you have any idea when that's going to happen?
And just one more thing.
Sorry.
There are other individuals involved, and the judge will determine, as they do in all of these CPR cases, is this something that can be released with the names? Is this something that can be released with the redacted names? Is this something that should not be released and is not a public record and is specifically excluded by the Act as being a public record? That will be up for the judge to decide. Now, CPRA number 2, which is submitted the night of February 10th at the board meeting.
Right.
I have not heard from the district on.
And you had 8, weren't there 8?
I believe there were 8 different, very specific documents identified.
Right. So But we have no idea when the judge is going to make that determination, right?
I have asked my attorney to try to determine when the hearing will be and to try to give me an answer this week, and he is researching that.
Okay,
I don't know.
Exciting.
Usually, in my experience with writs, they're expedited because they involve critical issues and things that can't wait for years for the court to process. And I think I've read that they don't want the CPRA process stalled by going to the courts. That the intent of that law was to have transparency with the actions of public employers, and that would certainly undermine that whole process if it took years to obtain.
When I asked for information, public information, I was sent the letter that everybody else received from the attorney, you cited a case, I guess, and he was rebutting the case, right?
Somebody cited the case. Are you through the question?
Yes.
When the district responds to a CPRA request, if they're denying it, they must give a rationale. So the district's legal counsel gave the rationale that they don't need to release any of the 94 pages because of the Marken case, Marken, which was a teacher in, I believe, Santa Monica, Malibu Unified School District. The case, my attorney's read the case, I've read the case, I've dealt with public information requests for 10 years, if not more. It's not applicable.
Well, isn't that what Nicholas said at the meeting?
Yes. And
he was referring to that case, right?
That case cites another case, which is a BRV case, which my attorney cited in the writ, that is specifically related to a superintendent and a board. And in that case, it's very clear that a public official and elected public officials don't have privacy rights to the extent that a teacher or employee might. And so in the public interest, those records were released under that case because the standard is even lower than what was applied in the Marken case to the teacher.
Okay. Got it. Okay, John, why do you think you were fired, really?
Honestly, I think I was fired because the superintendent does not want me to ask any more questions or get answers to these questions. And he decided to cut my career short and pay me out at substantial cost to the district, I think with the understanding that I would go away. And all I can say is that's not who I am. I'm going to pursue answers to the unresolved questions, whether they turn out to be fine or whether they don't. I believe I was terminated for asking those hard questions and pursuing the complaint against the superintendent, which is also protected. You can't be fired for filing a complaint against someone. So that's above and beyond whistleblowers. But I asked the tough questions, and I had to maintain my integrity and my ethics in pursuing that, and the result is an abrupt termination.
Yeah. So, and what's your main purpose for going? I think I know the answer to this, but what's your main purpose for going public?
Despite what people may think, I am not contemplating a lawsuit. That's not my interest. My interest is accountability. Are we going to allow our public officials and our elected board to treat people this way? And as we discussed, and as many people have discussed, what employee would come forward, given my circumstances, with an excellent work record, who asked questions of the superintendent and who was terminated? Who is going to come forward to ask questions without having fear of their career being ended or deviated? Now remember, the power of the superintendent is to recommend actions to the board for employment and promotion. That doesn't happen without the superintendent's support. So I think the message is chilling to other people. And I personally need to resolve that.
How do you think in the end that this is going to be resolved? I mean, what's your dream?
My dream is really quite simple, Sandy, believe it or not. As complex as our dialogues can
Yes.
get with the technicalities, I'd like the public to have the facts in their hands and make their own decision.
Mm-hmm.
Let them read it. Maybe they won't understand it. Maybe they'll have 1,000 more questions. But this is not all about John. This is about Newport Mesa, who was a family-oriented district that welcomed dialogue, that welcomed debate, that superintendents were challenged with dialogue. I'd like to restore the accountability to the board and the superintendent, who I believe have not acted appropriately.
How would that actually happen, though? Would you see the superintendent, I mean, in your dream, right? Do you see the superintendent apologizing, owning up to it, being fired? I don't, I mean, what's the end game here?
I don't know. I personally don't think this superintendent is a match for Newport Mesa. And there are many other things that obviously I've seen that cause people to question his management style. And that is pervasive. I can tell you, many people won't speak out, but I heard it almost every day and increasing, is that there is a false impression of input. There is false sincerity. There is an agenda that he has that he carries out regardless of the input he receives. And I don't know the ultimate answer to that, but he, so far from what I've seen, is not a good fit for Newport Mesa. And he doesn't seem to have the ethics to take a step back in how the board behaves. And unfortunately, the board has given their unconditional support to the superintendent. That is a perfect storm. And that is, I believe, what we are experiencing with this board and with this superintendent so far today on February 18th, 2015.
I think we'll have to end on that, John. Do you have anything else?
No, I don't.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your coming in. Thank you.
Thank you.